I'm Ben Thompson from WisDOT. So I'm the alternative contracting engineer. I'm not a DBE specific person, but I've been helping the department run our design build program. So we kind of split the difference between the two sides of this issue that we're here to talk about.
Thank you, Ben. Good morning. I'm Scott Hoffman. I'm the team lead with the Small Business Contracting Unit at Minnesota DOT. So working with the DBE program and small business contracting, reviewing special projects, things like that. Been with MnDOT for 5 years, and I was with Connecticut DOT for over 8 years before that. So thank you for having us.
Just a real quick overview of what we're going to do. We're going to go into just a real quick background of the WisDOT design build program, and then a quick same snapshot type of thing for the design build program. We're going to talk about open-ended performance plans, which is kind of the title of the presentation. So you guys probably know that already, but we're going to do a what and a why. We're going to do how it works. We're going to talk about how we or what we need to include in one. We're going to talk about updating them, evaluating them, how the DOT will evaluate the plans that come in, monitoring a plan, and then also the good faith efforts that are a little bit different than they are under a regular project. And then finally, we'll do a real quick sum up with the benefits of the OEPP, and then we might walk through, if we have time, the WisDOT requirements. It's kind of the Cliff Note version. So our design build program is still a pilot. We were granted permission or required, depending on how you look at it, to do 6 projects starting in 2019. We've got 2 that are underway. Well, one's finished, one's underway, one's canceled, and 3 more are coming up. So there were some caps on the dollar values. There were some different types of design build that we were supposed to use in the projects. And so those are kind of details, but basic idea is that we're doing 6 projects. The process for design build project, if anybody here has never done one before, really what it is that WisDOT develops the preliminary plans. We usually will do an environmental document. I say usually because, well, 2 out of 2 so far. Get the design around 30%. That's a very, very loose number. So preliminary is a better word for it, really. Get some real estate started, get some utility stuff started, and then we move into our 2-step process, which is a little bit different than the traditional pre-procurement process that we do kind of the same no matter what. So the 2-phase process is an RFQ and an RFP. And if you were in the Blotnick presentation just a couple minutes ago, you saw him talk about RFQs and RFPs. The RFQ is a request for qualifications. So interested teams will submit their qualifications to the DOT. Those will generally pick 2 to 4, I think is what the legislation says, 2 to 4 firms to be shortlisted. The shortlisted firms then will get their RFPs to put together their proposals in response. And then they will submit those back to WisDOT. There's a whole process that goes into that RFP, or that proposal development phase. But eventually they'll send them back to WisDOT. WisDOT evaluates them, and then we choose the successful design builder.
Thank you. MnDOT has had more experience with design builds, as was said in the presentation. We've been doing alternative delivery, design build, or construction management, general contractor for over 20 years. 1996 was our first design build project. And then 2002 was kind of the first modern design build project. We've since moved to best value authority, so no longer low bid. We do an evaluation of the full proposal during the RFP and to ensure that we're getting the best value for our project. And then in 2013, we did our first construction management general contractor, but our focus will be on design build. So we've had 52 projects, 31 of which have been under the best value design build with between $1 and over $200 million in their scope. This does have to follow both state and federal laws. We have certain limits under state statute in terms of the type we can. Only 10% of our overall program can be design build, and then under the federal statute, 23 CFR 636 for the regulations for the federal aid design build projects. It does designate direct oversight authority for MnDOT with our manual. and any technique not allowed by design build manual would also not be allowed by FHWA. And then other techniques to consider. We do follow the NEPA process, which is required to be completed prior to our request for proposals. And then having FHWA authorize, which must occur as well. So we are, again, currently in the middle of this with Blotnick, and we'll go forward from there. And then any questions regarding MnDOT's design build project, I recommend you contact Peter Davich. He'll be able to give you far more details than I can on the engineering and construction side for MnDOT's design build. So thank you.
And then for WisDOT, it's me and it's Christine that you need to talk to if you have design build questions. So the open-ended performance plan is kind of a new thing. I think that FHWA developed it specifically for Minnesota and Wisconsin because I read it as OPE, but it's an OEPP. So we would still include a DBE goal in the RFP. So that stays kind of the same as it would be under a regular project. The goals get set essentially the same way. The difference comes when we submit our proposals. So now instead of submitting your regular DBE packet, you're submitting this OEPP, which is an open-ended performance plan. And I had to say it 100 times before I finally got it right. So I'm just going to say it a bunch of times so you guys remember it when you leave. These include not necessarily committed DBE firms, but they include work types that you might plan to have DBE firms complete, the amounts of dollars that those work types will probably take up or that are planned to take up, and then a time frame for when the DBE firms will be doing their work. Those are really the three big pieces that the federal legislation, or I guess the federal rule, requires for an OEPP. And then one thing that maybe is obvious, but we have to point it out, I think, because it maybe isn't. When you submit your OEPP, you have to show your plan meeting the goal. You can't tell us you tried and didn't make it because it's still a goal. It's not actually a number yet.
So with a traditional project, you have the design that has been set up either by the DOT or by a consultant engineer, and then you put out with all the specific item amounts out for bid, and then the construction firms will bid on it, and DOT set their goals based on those final design estimates. So it's amounts and materials are pretty well decided by that phase. And therefore, then, since it's pretty clear what is required on the project, prime contractors have an easier time to decide how they're going to meet the goal, suppliers, which subcontractors, et cetera. But with a design build project, there's too many unknowns by the time that those requests for proposals were coming in. And USDOT and FHWA were seeing cases where firms were being committed without fully knowing the specific scopes of it, and then having to be maybe removed from the project because project conditions changed from what it was considered at the time of proposal. And this was causing disruption within the DBE firms, or then goals were not being met and just a good faith effort. And it really was not meeting the intents of the program. So now with design builds, again, we're asking for the request for proposals around at the 30% mark. So we have, as we saw from the Blotnick presentation, a fairly clear idea of the general notion of what we're looking to do, where the scopes of interest might be. But, the full project still has to be designed, so we wouldn't know amounts. Therefore, instead of committing to a specific firm at that time, it allows it to be far more open. We still need to know the specific scopes. So, don't just tell us 20% in the engineering, 10% in supplies, the rest in subcontractors. We do need to know rebar, electrical, inspection, some supply ideas within that general way. But there is a lot more flexibility, and it also allows that if the conditions change or notions change, you can continue to change the plan, just maintaining complete communication with the DOTs until you actually then decide to commit to a specific firm. And then it would return to the normal process of if you are going to change that firm's scope or remove that firm, then following the more rigid reporting requirements on our design bid build projects.
Why do we need to do an OEPP on a design build project? I think Scott covered a little bit of this, but The big answer is that it's now required. So federal highways, USDOT require this on design build projects. And just to kind of lay it out a little more, that normally when we have a design bid build contract, right, you advertise it once you have all of the details, you have all the quantities, you have all of the work types laid out. And here with design build contracts, when you're advertising this to go out and get let, which is the proposal phase, there's a lot of details that are left that we haven't necessarily worked through yet. So a lot of that final design materials, quantities and things like that, the schedule, aren't necessarily 100% complete when we do our RFP. Some DBEs, as Federal Highways found, were reluctant to maybe subcontract. I think this maybe is more on the larger projects that take, a number of years. You don't necessarily want to sign a subcontract 5 years before you're actually going to do the work, right? And there might not be enough details for a good bid or a good quote. Project needs might change, especially on those longer term projects. Available DBE firms might change in a 5-year stretch on a longer project. And a lot of times, as Scott mentioned, on a regular project, we're getting things that are submittals for the good faith efforts, right? Because the goal isn't met. So we want to minimize the times when the goal isn't met. This is just the federal requirement portion of it. Federal Highways is now requiring open-ended performance plans for design build projects, but they're only used on design build projects. So there's not OEPPs for regular projects. That's not something they're even considering as far as we know. So it's specifically for design build. And even the other CMGC and the other kinds of alternative contracting that Minnesota and other states do, it's not designed for that. It's designed specifically for design build.
How does an OEPP work? All the proposers, when they submit their complete packet with how they intend to design the project and build the project, must also include the open-ended performance plan as a condition of their responsive proposal. So if you're not including the plan, it will be rejected. This is your binding commitment to meet the goal. So as Ben said earlier, there is no, if we set a 15 or 12% goal on the project and you come in with 10, this would also be rejected, because we want to see a complete detail of how you're going to meet the goal that we set. So, and this comes from USDOT and FHWA. This is not the state DOT saying we don't allow good faith efforts. They are saying there will not be good faith efforts, at least at this stage of the proposal. So we want to see how you're meeting the goal, within the various scopes. We also want to see that it is reasonable. So we don't want to see you saying we're going to meet everything with trucking. We'd like to see a variety of scopes, and that it's clear that thought and time has been put into dividing the scopes into the best opportunities you see to utilize disadvantaged business firms. We would also want to be seeing in this identifying who the main DBE contact within the prime contractor will be, with some background information. What is their experience with the firm and with DBEs specifically? It does not necessarily have to be a designated DBE specialist, but at least on this project, who would be the main contact for outreach issues, et cetera. Again, though you do not have to identify specific firms at this time, we do need to see, as we've said before, the specific scopes. Generally, when in this project it will happen, if you can give detailed months, that's great. If it's still more broad, within, again, Blotnick's looking to be 5-year project. So year 1, year 2, somewhere in there. So we have a general idea of when we can expect these scopes to be performed. And then the rough dollar value. Of course, we know that this will change as more details come in, but with a general idea of the value of the project, what percentages will these scopes that the DBs will be performing constitute? And then the sponsor will be providing ongoing monitoring throughout the life of the project. So once the proposal has been accepted, it does not end there. Of course, there'll be more details if things change. And then as well, also the further changes when you begin to commit to specific DBE firms once you have far more information. And then the recipient and the design builder would agree to make written revisions throughout the life of the project, as long as the design builder continues to use good faith effort to meet the goal. So I'll be continuing discussions.
So what does an OEPP include? It needs to include the work types for DBE participation that are anticipated, the time frame, so about when those activities will take place, and then the anticipated dollar value so that you can actually calculate that percentage that meets the goal. And like we mentioned before, when you submit your initial OEPP, it has to show the commitments adding up, or the anticipated commitments adding up to at least the value of the goal. The other thing that's a little different here is that we need participation. At least in Wisconsin, I don't know, is it the same in Minnesota?
We have one goal. We're not
Yep.
doing separate. Yeah.
So we have one goal, but we don't tell the firms how much has to be design, how much has to be construction, but we do want to see participation from both types of DBEs in the proposal, or in the OEPP. So that's something that's a little bit different too than what we're used to maybe on a construction project. This is kind of what our OEPP is going to look like. This is still all draft stuff. It's not been approved by Federal Highways or anything like that yet, but this is the WisDOT draft version of the main heart of what an OEPP is going to look like. So you can see column 1, you got the planned work type. You can put a committed firm name in here, but if you do, they're committed. So then you're on the hook for them. So you don't want to do that necessarily until you have commitments and you know that the project is far enough along that we can really call those commitments. The work items. So what kinds of work we're going to have that firm do, if we know them. If we're not quite there yet, some of that can maybe be left for a later submittal, but that's something else that needs to be included. The time frame that we mentioned a couple of times. You know, in our example, we got quarter 2 and 3 of 2027. So as narrowed down as you can get, right? It's not going to be March 3rd to the 17th, but whatever you've got there. And then whether it's professional services or construction, a supplier or manufacturer, and then trucking. And then we have the dollar value, the amount that we're actually crediting, depending on these other columns. And then finally, whether it's design or construction. And then it will calculate the goal down here with the project goal, the cost proposal, and then here's our achieved number. Minnesota's got kind of the same thing.
So yeah, you can see it again fairly well. We'll have the overall DB goal and then the estimated DB value, dollar value, and of course, as we get more specifics, we can figure that out. The rough type of scope general, and then if you can get more details into the specific items, that would be appreciated. We know that we'll get more detail as more time passes. With the NACE code that applies to it, again, the rough anticipated when it will start and when it will end. The name of the DBE firm, if available, so most likely with your first submittal with the RFP, the firms will not be included, but you'd be updating the same spreadsheet throughout the life of the project. So eventually when you do have the specific firms, the name can go there with the firm's address, the total commitment dollars, and then the percent of the credit claimed. So similar to what we saw on WisDOT, whether it's subcontractor or 60% supply or 40% distributor or trucking, and then a breakdown of year by years for the overall scope, especially if the scope is likely to go over multiple years. You kind of want to see what the progress will be from year to year with the total at the end. So as we've kind of have covered, flexibility is essential. That's why USDOT created this program, and that's what we're hoping to have, that by allowing more time to select the firms, more time to allow for revisions as more information about the project comes forth, the DB plan by the end will be one that will most likely be workable and not as open to changes that we've seen from projects past. And then the design build team and then the sponsors are working together on this constant communication, at least monthly update meetings. I know, especially for Blotnick, MnDOT is going to have a designated specialist to work with firms for the DBE project. We'll be hiring that, so that there can be close communication with progress and how things may be changing. It can be updated throughout the project, working with the two agencies and having us approve them. Again, when it's just general scopes, that can just be notifications. And then once a firm is designated, then it returns to the more rigid process that each of our states have.
Yeah, so this slide was just kind of in here to show what the timeline of this OEPP update is kind of going to look like. So there's different times throughout the process when you're going to update your plan. Once project details are finalized, you can probably start to update that plan. If a work type changes or work amounts change, or you add a commitment, so you have a DBE that's now committed, you would update the plan. Not every single change needs to be an updated submittal, but we are, at least in Wisconsin, we are thinking we're going to have a requirement to update it once before NTP1 and once before NTP2. And then after that, there's still certainly opportunities to change it up until there's no more subcontracting opportunities left on the project. When the commitments are changed, when we reduce work, when we eliminate work, the OEPP needs to be updated, but then you also need to go through that same process that that Scott mentioned, the more rigid process that we always go through when we change work on a project after we have a commitment. In Wisconsin, we're only going to have one submittal of the 1506, the DT 1506, which is what you usually submit with your bid proposal on a regular project. This will come at some point after the proposal. It won't come necessarily with the proposal. And then we will submit those attachment A's or exhibit A's in Minnesota for every contractor or every DBE firm that we get a commitment from. So those will be updated. And then once you get an attachment A, you'll update your OEPP plan. And it is maybe one little extra step, I guess, but I think overall, it actually might save us a little bit of time.
And so I think we've been making clear with the expectations that what should be communicated, the anticipated work, and showing enough work opportunities to achieve the goal, and then also a narrative on how you're working with this and that type of detail. We are planning this being a pass-fail. So again, if the goal is not met, if it seems to be focused in one scope, those could be areas that could lead to a failure of the plan to pass. But we are also looking at if there's a particularly detailed plan that could then add possible points in looking at the other factors involved. So it could benefit you having a better OEPP in terms of getting the proposal.
Right now, WisDOT is not planning to award points for the OEPP, at least not for the upcoming pilot projects. It'll be more of a pass-fail. We're going to look at that for future projects if we have them to see if there's a way to incorporate that. Then we're up to the monitoring part. So the DOT is going to monitor how the OEPP is performing, how the design builder is meeting the OEPP throughout the project through design and construction. Flexibility, revisions, we're going to have, this process is meant to be flexible. That's what the open-ended part means. So all the way throughout, we're going to want the design builder working with the department to update that plan, to come together and get ideas and not surprise each other. And like we mentioned before too, all the changes need to be approved by the DOT. And if we're working together through the whole process, that really shouldn't be an issue, right? It'll just be, here's what we talked about. Yep, check. As we execute those contracts with the DBE firms, as we start making those commitments, then we'll start to make progress towards the goal. So again, meet regularly, review the progress, review the plan, submit participation updates once a month is what we're going to include in our contract. I think you said the same. And we do have, again, in a draft, this is the participation update. So this is not the OEPP, and this is not something that a firm has to use, but we're going to need some of this information. I think the OBOC is going to need, this is basically just a running tally of what was subcontracted, was it complete, when was the start date, how much was proposed in the OEPP, and how much now do we actually have, how much we paid last quarter or last month, this month. Again, this is going to be like a template that people can use, or they can use their own system as long as the same information's coming in.
As we said, at the time of initial submittal, there are no such things as good faith efforts. We can modify it, different work opportunities, the values may change, the timeframes could change. Then as your individual commitments begin to change, then it can be the good faith explanations of why a commitment to an individual firm wasn't met or why the goal may not be met despite all opportunities. Of course, if the change happens year one, we would be, far more communication, a lot more time to still figure out how that goal should be met, how the commitments should be met, than if happens right at the end of the project, something unexpected happens. But that'd be, again, part of the ongoing communication. But it has to be at that stage of the process where good faith effort could occur, not prior. Okay. And so, yeah, again, we've kind of covered the benefits, but DBEs are not committing to the prime, committing to the project until the more details are known. And it can help then diversify the opportunities, both on the design phase and the construction phase for our firms. There will be a high probability that the DB can more successfully complete their subcontract with more information under this scheme. Achieving the goal is more likely with these based on just rough guesses that were occurring at the RFP phase. From what USDT has heard so far, design builders do like this open-ended because, again, everybody has more knowledge, everybody has more information.
So that's more or less the formal part. I do have this slide that I put together for Wisconsin firms. This is still very much draft form, but it just kind of gives you a Cliff Notes version of what the rest of the OEPP is going to look like. We showed that table a little earlier. That's the heart of it. There are a couple other things that need to go into it. So section 1 is just identifying the goals, which we'll take care of in the RFP. You guys just have to acknowledge that you've seen it. Section 2 then is those types of work. This is the narrative that Scott mentioned, part of it anyway, where we talk about the types of work that DBEs could do, reasoning behind it. So this is where we get that idea of whether it's a thought out plan or whether it's just we're going to get 10% of the project from trucking. If you have some information on availability of firms like in the area or for the project, that would go in here. Any efforts that you're going to, as a design builder, that you're going to put in to notify or solicit or recruit DBEs, and then how DBE firms are going to communicate and integrate with the project team. Section 3 is kind of the end of that narrative as well. Any kind of tools that you have for implementing the plan, anything that you have that you want to share with us about how you're going to get this project or how this project goal met. Then administration is kind of it's got the compliance contact, like Scott mentioned, how you're going to administer the plan. Tracking and reporting is kind of that form we just showed a minute ago. It's going to be something similar to that. Again, doesn't have to be that form, can be the design builder's internal form, could be a email with bullet points, whatever it's going to be. And then finally, the last section is capacity building, which is more of a if there's any other plans in the works for mentoring or protegeing or any of those other pieces of the DBE program that are going to be involved in this project. The last thing I wanted to put up there is just a plug. Here's the projects in Wisconsin, and I think the projects, all the ones in Minnesota that are coming up, they're all on the website. We've got 3 coming up. One is SOQ is due 2/19/25, so that one's already underway, the TOMA project. The Wausau project, it's going to be released in a month or so, month and a half, and then this I-94 project is coming soon to a DOT near you. Before you ask a question, I want to qualify one more thing. You heard a lot of maybes, maybe, and a lot of potentially, and this is brand new for both of us. So we're still working through the process. We're still getting approvals from FHWA for what we showed you today. So this is our best guess right now, our best knowledge as to what we have for an OEPP. So things might change, but I think we got the basics here.